All right, I've tried coming at this from a couple of different angles. This is like my third take on this, so I'm gonna try it this way. And I wasn't gonna use a whiteboard, but here we are. Um, so we want to talk about officiating and all of this wonderful stuff. And I've got on the boards here almost every penalty you can get. I'm staying away from like too many men on the ice and bench minors and all this stuff because really there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the game and it seems like they change how they're enforcing it. Now, the one at the top and on the left is fighting. And fighting is allowed in hockey. It's not allowed in other professional sports. You start a fight in basketball, you're ejected, it's a one-game suspension. Eventually, I think fighting makes its way out of the game. Now, people are going to say that the game gets dirtier when you take the fighting out. I would counter and say the game was plenty dirty back in the 80s. We just had the one fixed camera and a lot of stuff got missed. Whereas today, where you got like 10, 15, 20 cameras, at ice level, it seems, and then you've got everybody else with their phone out to capture whatever else that those cameras might miss. We catch a lot of stuff. So a lot of stuff that might have been fine back in the 80s, you may not have even noticed. Now we'll go over it all in slow motion and with a fine tooth comb. And I think a lot of stuff gets brought up that shouldn't. Now, how much of this stuff would get dealt with if you still had fighting? I would argue none of it. None of it. Right now everybody's talking about Marchand last night with a rabbit punch on Harrington. It's a rabbit punch. It's one of those things. Is it dirty? Yes. Does it happen during the game? Yeah, it does. If a player from Columbus could have come in and started thumping on Marchand, does he do it? Yeah. Yeah. The difference is back in the 80s, you had the enjoyment of a guy coming in and thumping on him without any kind of an instigator penalty. Instigator came in and it changed all that. But I would counter with this as well. We don't have the players in the league that fight anymore. We don't have nearly as many players who are willing to drop the gloves. If you're a goal scorer and you drop your gloves and you break your hand, what's going to happen? Right. So there are a lot of considerations when it comes to the fighting. Concussions and all that other wonderful stuff that takes place. Ask Svechnikov about fighting and how that goes down. And I know people are going to say, well, that was Ovechkin. You know what? It can happen in any fight. We have seen a lot of former fighters in the league who are sadly no longer with us, in part because we just went, it's a good old-fashioned hockey fight, nothing wrong with a hockey fight, and we've since discovered that there is. Now, cross-checking needs to be called consistently, and we've seen that recent action where we've seen the whole cross-check to the chest. I don't have my hockey stick in here, but it's a cross-check to the chest on Pavelski, and then he falls awkwardly. And, it turns into this whole big thing that we're still, talking about. Not nearly as much as we were when it happened. And it'll die down, but it's never going to be completely gone. Those incidents never completely stop getting talked about. So cross-checking does need to be called more regularly. Does this happen more because guys don't fight? No, I don't think so. Cross-checks back in the day were pretty standard. Roughing. What's interesting to me is that these two things, the line between these two sometimes is confusing to me. Where I'll watch guys drop the gloves, actually throw some punches, and then I hear 2 minutes for roughing on both, and I'm like, what? Okay. Or sometimes I'll see a couple guys go at it a little bit, and maybe a punch or two, and then 5 minutes to each for fighting. Why? So, I get confused sometimes as to where that line is, and with different referees, the line is different. But this is what Marchand could have been called for last night against Columbus. This is what Scott Harrington said he wished was called, was a 2-minute minor. He said it's a hockey play. After the whistle, stuff goes down, stuff happens. But should Marchand have had a penalty? Absolutely. Slashing. This is the one that's wildly inconsistent. So they weren't calling it very much, and then there was the ugly incident with Mark Methot where the tip of his finger gets snapped off by Sidney Crosby on a slash. So the NHL goes, that's an ugly one. We're not going to suspend for that, but we have to retroactively fix it. So any slash to the hands is going to be a penalty. Now, I do think that there's some ridiculousness that goes in here. I've mentioned this recently as well, where a guy's holding his stick not very hard. He's not holding it very well, and the guy, his opponent sees that, just knocks it out of his hands, and then they get a slash for it. I've played floor hockey and knocked the stick out of a guy's hands and laughed about it. And I didn't consider at the time that I was slashing at all. But then again, that was in the late 80s, early 90s. So I guess, right? So, different game and all that. And then usually even the other guy's teammates would be like, you should hold on to your stick a little bit better than that. Because you'll see a guy, he's barely holding it. It's like, oh, there you go. Hooking's one of those ones that if they don't call it often enough, we'll start seeing slow, big defensemen holding. That's why I've got hooking and holding right next to each other, because these two are really kind of attached to one another at the hip. Coming out of the lockout in 2004-2005, when we came into a brand new league with a brand new season after losing the Stanley Cup that year and losing an entire season, they looked at the amount of hooking and holding in the game and they said it's too much. We've got to stop punishing skill. That's what Mario Lemieux retired, because he felt that his skill was punished. He was getting a lot of physical abuse out there, and the NHL wasn't doing anything about it. And again, I know people think it's bad right now, and look at this and look at this incident. Man, it was so bad in the late 80s, early 90s, and it just kept getting worse. And Lemieux's career was shortened by it. So when the NHL came out and decided to deal with this, which dealt with a lot of the really kind of nasty undercurrent of the NHL, it helped. There's still room to fix things, but it helped. So as long as they're still calling this consistently, I'm happy. Where I get nervous is that let's say that going into the 2019-2020 season, the NHL says, all right, we're going to consistently call cross-checking. And then all of a sudden hooking and holding comes back. So that's my concern, because that seems to be the case where, which rule are we enforcing this year? You'll notice goalie interference isn't on the board, because not touching that one right now. Tripping's pretty standard, and it's called pretty standard. If you have the puck and you go down, odds are the guy who's next to you is going to go down with a penalty, whether he did or didn't trip you. Been a lot of phantom tripping calls, not just in the playoffs, saw it in the regular season too. It's just standard. Referees watch this in real time. They can't stand there with their phone and go, oh yeah, in the replay I can see. No, they don't have that, and they're not going to. If we go to a league that reviews every single penalty, games are going to be 4.5 hours. Sportsmanlike conduct is one that's interesting to me, because where's the line? How many times have we watched as coaches, assistant coaches, players on the bench are verbally berating the official on the ice, yelling and cursing and swearing at him, and nothing? And that's why I find it funny when people say, well, you can't even criticize officials in this league anymore. They do it in game. They do it plenty in game. And it seems to take a lot before they actually get a penalty. And then when that penalty's called, the team keeps yelling and cursing and swearing at the official. It's so strange. It's so bizarre. You're under arrest for robbery. Oh yeah, I'm going to steal this too. Now what are you going to do? Well, we're not going to arrest you for that one. And it's weird, because if you would think that would discourage, but they seem to swear and curse and yell more. But yeah, the unsportsmanlike conduct is a weird one, and it doesn't get called in game nearly consistently enough either. Boarding is not called consistently. Man, I talk about cross checks, and honestly, cross checking and boarding, those two are in that same range. So to me, if you cross check a guy into the boards, you may or may not get that penalty. And I'm not sure. Like, I don't know if it's the referee looks and goes, okay, the defending player turned his back at the last moment, and then he gets hit into the board, so I'm not going to give either penalty there. But again, that's a judgment call, and it's really tough, and I'm glad I don't have that job. Boarding is the one that really scares me. The boarding, when a guy gets nailed head first into the boards, even shoulder first into the boards, that's where that's when I kind of wince. I don't get that so often with fighting as I do with boarding, because I know, like, oh, that could knock the shoulder out. Oh, that's a concussion, and you'll see the guy come up and he's all wobbly, or you'll see the guy coming up grabbing his arm, and then it's upper body injury, and we're all yelling at the TV, it's a shoulder. Kneeing hardly gets called, but I will say this. Compared to 15 to 20 years ago, I don't think it's as much a problem in the NHL, and I'll tell you why. When you stick your knee out to hit the guy, if your knee isn't fully locked, you can injure yours just as easily as theirs. So kneeing is a very, very dangerous occupational hazard. And I don't see it nearly as much in the NHL now as I used to, and I'm very happy about that. And I don't seem to see elbowing as much either. Elbowing was very commonly called. So either guys are getting away with this, or it's just not as much a part of the game with the way it's being played now. Maybe because this has been cut down on as well. So maybe the elbowing was part of this as well. Holding, hooking, elbowing, all to try to take that skill player and pull the skill out of the game. Spearing, you don't see that very often, and I'm glad. Spearing's ugliness. There's no place for that. That's just no. Not a fan. High sticking, and of course high sticking is where you can get 2, you can get 4 if you draw blood, and you can get 5 for high sticking, and you can start getting suspended for high sticking. I wasn't a huge fan in the beginning. I remember when they brought in the 4 minutes if you draw blood. I thought that was odd, because I thought, well, not every ugly high stick is going to draw blood. I don't know. But you know what? Now I'm okay with it. It has helped to keep sticks down from where they were. It was bad for a while there. So the 4 for drawing blood and the 5 in a game in some situations, I agree with as well. And of course you have your stick swinging as well, which gets into the whole spearing item. High sticking though does not get called consistently. It is one penalty that if we started doing like some kind of an instant replay, making sure you get the right guy for high sticking, I kind of lean towards allowing that to be reviewable. Because how many times have we seen it where a guy's in the corner and the guy's in the corner, the guy's checking him, referee's in the other corner, stick comes up, he actually catches himself in the face with his own stick, and the arm goes up because you see a guy get hit in the face. The referee cannot tell that it was the guy hitting himself with his own stick. So I would be okay with referees looking and going, oh, okay, so that's not a penalty. That would be quick. Unlike a lot of these other things, whether or not a high stick actually hits somebody should be a pretty quick thing. And to overturn it, you have to see conclusive proof that the stick did or didn't make contact. Charging. Charging doesn't get called consistently at all. There have been times where I've seen, something that looks kind of egregious to me and nothing. And there's other times where I'm like, that didn't seem like that big a deal. Oh, that's a charge because he took more than X amount of steps. I don't know that this one will ever be considered a big deal. But, again, when you combine charging with boarding, this is boarding's the one that really, really scares me. Because, again, if you get the charge, so you've got a guy really building up as much steam as possible to drill a guy into the boards, probably with a cross-check, you got yourself 3 penalties right there, don't you? This I would think is 2, 4, 5 in a game. So 2, 4, 19 minutes and penalties right there, and the guy's kicked out of the game. And then to me, once you get this incident take place, that should mean an automatic suspension. I think maybe, where basketball is the automatic suspension for a fight, I think the idea that there would be an automatic suspension for certain plays works. And then the NHL would only step in to overrule it. And it might take some of this George Parros' horrible conversation out of it. If it was just automatic, that some of these things, when you cross the line and you get 5 in a game, automatic game suspension. But I don't know that the NHL will ever have the guts to do it. Now, these are the ones here. And again, these ones can also be combined with boarding. Check from behind, check to the head. There's no room in the game for checking to the head. We've learned about concussions, CTE, and all this other wonderful stuff over the last few years especially. And yes, multiple concussions lead to massive health problems for the rest of your life. Sometimes one concussion is all it takes. So getting that out of the game and trying to make it so that players pick a different path to make that hit, I'm 100% in charge in support of that. The checks from behind, this to me, as soon as you hit the guy from behind, I don't see it as any different than the rabbit punch. I don't. Guy's not expecting that check from behind 9 times out of 10. And when a guy's not braced for a hit, it is completely different than when the guy is. So, again, with the NHL right now, I think their major issue, I think, is going to end up being this. And that's going to be where a lot of it is from here on, because of the speed, the size of the players, Fighting is pretty much out of the game. This year, I believe I read that we had a fight in roughly 1 out of 5 games. It is not a major deal anymore. Fighting is no longer a big thing. And as enjoyable as a good fight can be, they do tend to lead to concussions. And again, I haven't seen that taking fighting out of the game has led to a dirtier game, because power plays, penalty minutes are just down. From where they were in the 80s, penalties are down. So it's not just a matter of fighting. The penalty minutes are nowhere near what they used to be. Power plays don't get the same amount of opportunities, which means either they're not calling anything or players are playing cleaner. And because hockey players are cleaner now than they were in the 80s, those little incidents that take place that used to be no big deal back in the 80s, now we can zero in on them and say, that's not right, you got to get that out of there. Truth is, the guy's probably a throwback. But we'll see where officiating goes in 2019, 2020. And remember, for all of the incidents, and whether it's something going on now or whether it's in the last round or whether it'll be in the next one, the NHL does watch and they do try to adapt. That's why the hooking and the holding were taken out as much as possible coming out of that lockout, because they understood the game had lost some of its entertainment value and they needed to fix it. So we'll see what they do in the coming years. I would look at the next collective bargaining agreement as well before they actually make some potentially bigger change to things. Because coming out of a new collective bargaining agreement, they seem to have more courage to make a big change to the game. The game, I will say, the National Hockey League right now is more entertaining than it ever was. As much fun as a bench clearing brawl can be to watch, and I admit, when I was in the 80s, when I was a kid, and Quebec and Montreal went at it, that was very entertaining. That brawl went on for a while. I want to say like 20, 25 minutes. It went on for a while, and it was something. That was crazy. You kind of expected Howard Cosell to come out and start calling the action. I know it's too old of a reference for most people out there, but some will get it. But and again, I know there's other calls that I don't have on the board, like goaltending interference, but there's a standard and they need to get it and they need to maintain it. And the argument about protecting goalies goes all the way back to ask Buffalo fans about 1999. And then why we got into a period where players couldn't have their skate in the crease. Yeah, protecting goalies goes back decades. And we've never had a situation that's made everybody happy. Let me know what you guys think. Which calls are more likely to not be called consistently? Which ones should be called more consistently? Are players keeping their elbows down, or is it just a matter of we're so busy looking at everything else we don't really bother with this? Let me know what you guys think in the comments section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.